Hello everybody, welcome back to the Wrestling Guardians podcast. As ever, hope everybody's doing well out there. All of our listeners are hopefully staying safe. How are you doing in here? How was your week? Anything to note?
Doing well, thank you, Dan. A pretty hectic week. Work's just been ramping up recently. But other than that, hope you and your family and loved ones are all safe, and the same to all our listeners.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, same to you. Okay, so we thought we'd do something slightly different this week. That's partly because we did promise last time that we try to be a bit more positive about professional wrestling, and also considering that Summerslam is just around the corner. What we thought we'd do today is talk about some of our most favourite matches in SummerSlam history. At least from my point of view, this isn't necessarily matches that I consider to be the best, but maybe just matches that I sort of personally am very fond of for whatever reason. So we'll be discussing those as the episode goes on.
Right.
Yeah. So I, hopefully, if it's okay with you, and I wanted to start with a relatively recent match from 2009 involving CM Punk and Jeff Hardy for the main event, the World Heavyweight Championship. Is this a match that you are aware of, or sort of think fondly about?
So Dan, I think this at around this time I would have been in high school, so I wasn't actively watching professional wrestling. But I got back into watching the WWE around 2011, 2012, around about the time when CM Punk did the infamous pipe bomb promo, and The Rock was coming back to do his series of matches with John Cena. So around that time, I started looking back at some of Punk's work, and I stumbled upon this gem at some point of time, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I must say, it certainly did live up to my expectations for the match.
Absolutely, yeah. I think first thing to mention, I mean, this is a match in what was, I think, a tremendous feud between the two guys. I think it just naturally lent itself so well, obviously, with Punk's kind of straight edge lifestyle versus Jeff Hardy's sort of various issues, shall we say, with substance abuse. It's one of those times when the WWE uses kind of real life and mixes it in with their storyline, but does it in a way that's actually sort of relatively tasteful and kind of works from a sort of entertainment standpoint. But yeah, I remember this is about the time I kind of got back into wrestling after a bit of a hiatus as well. Wasn't fully aware of who CM Punk was, to be honest. I kind of knew Hardy from the Attitude Era days. I didn't really think much of him as a babyface, but when he went through this heel turn and went after Hardy, the feud was just so good. Punk's might work, obviously we all know about. And I remember there was one segment on SmackDown when Punk comes to the ring dressed as Jeff Hardy, and then everybody sort of goes crazy for it, and then they realise it's Punk in disguise. I think it's just little things like that are just really something that Punk is able to kind of give to the wrestling business. So this whole thing was set up so well, and then to kind of main event a SummerSlam card, which obviously is very sort of prestigious thing for a wrestler to experience, I think is really good. And I think this whole thing was set up so well, to be honest. Any thoughts on the feud? I mean, were you able to see much of the feud as it went on, or again got into wrestling?
So Dan, this was before I'd gotten back into wrestling. So I didn't watch the feud as it happened. I had to go back and sort of watch it. But as you said, this sort of juxtaposition between the characters of Punk and Jeff Hardy worked really well, and this was in general a really good year for SmackDown. If you go back and look at the Wrestling Observer Newsletters Awards in 2009, SmackDown was awarded Best Television Show, and that's certainly not a publication that gives WWE a lot of credit. So I rest my case on that matter. This was also not Jeff Hardy's penultimate night in the WWE, at least on this run. He'd lose a steel cage match, I believe, to Punk the next on the following episode of SmackDown, and that be it for Jeff Hardy until his comeback with his brother, and he still remains with the company to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember that match as well. Actually, the sort of the loser leaves WWE match. Essentially, I think it was. So much drama to it, and I think what gives this this added element of excitement is the fact that I think these two guys in real life have like a fair bit of animosity between them. So it's always kind of telling when that sort of thing kind of shines through in a feud. We saw it with Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart a number of years before this. So this was kind of maybe this generation's version of that, really. And I think to this day, I think you occasionally will find them kind of taking little jabs at each other when they get the opportunity. So it's still not fully resolved, whatever the problems were between them. But two very professional athletes who were able to kind of put those issues to one side, at least for the actual match. I just remember it being, obviously it was a TLC match, and I think compared to like today's sort of ladder matches or whatever, the kind of things that we expect, this was actually quite a, like, I want to say like quite a subtle sort of TLC match. I mean, there were definitely some high spots and things and shocking moments, but it wasn't overdone. I think there was actually a very nice sort of flow to this match. The two of them obviously had have great chemistry between them. And it definitely wasn't a spot fest, is what I'm saying. It was a match that utilised the TLC element very well without it becoming like a spectacle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dan. It wasn't an all elite gymnastics production, if that's what we're trying to say. I had to get that in.
We've got to be positive today.
And I feel it's actually harder to do a TLC match with just two people in the ring, just because we're sort of so used to the sort of ADHD nature of what that type of match has become. But these two guys, they did, they told a very nice story and mix it in with nice high spots and everything. And obviously, the one that stands out is Jeff Hardy hitting the Swanton Bomb on to Punk on the announce table. That and the resulting desperate scrap for the title all just stand out, and it really is a fantastic ladder match. Up there with Michaels versus Razor Ramon for me.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, to that sort of final, I say final, but that spot from the top of the ladder towards the end of the match. I mean, obviously that was the big kind of crescendo that everything was leading up to, and I suppose when I say sort of the relative subtlety of the match overall, it kind of makes that last big spot more meaningful. Like today, you'd probably see that just randomly in the middle of a match, and then the guy would just get up straight away and do another like tope suicida or whatever. Like it's just the structure of this match was just so sort of professionally done that everything kind of built up to that. And then obviously there was the scramble for the actual title, and obviously the match's conclusion. So it's so well kind of put together, I think. And like you say, I think it's really difficult sometimes for a TLC match to be kind of conducted in such a good way when there's only two of them. But obviously they both know what they're doing. Hardy is a seasoned professional when it comes to ladder matches, and Punk is no kind of stranger to them either. I think what a lot of fans at the time, and again looking back now, kind of appreciate about this is that it was given the main event spot, and this was a card that involved, I believe, is it John Cena and
Randy Orton?
John Cena, Randy Orton.
Yes.
And then obviously the Legacy against DX. So there were a couple of options that Vince could have gone with for the main event of this show, but he went for Punk and Hardy, which is obviously the right decision here. And I think that again, that's testament to how well sort of SmackDown was doing as a show at this time. So were you kind of surprised by that, maybe?
Yeah, Dan, because I mean, obviously, I wasn't following it at the time, as I've said a few times before. But one of CM Punk's big gripes was that he just never got the opportunity to close out pay-per-views, and especially in sort of the era of the first brand split when Raw was hugely favored over SmackDown. It was surprising to see these two sort of headline the show over Randy Orton and John Cena, who were the two signature stars of the company at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think for all the problems that CM Punk has had about not being sort of respected enough maybe by the creative team or by Vince himself. Given this main event spot here was obviously very telling as to what they kind of thought of him as a performer back then. I mean, could you possibly argue that he was better treated in 2009 compared to like 2011 when he was actually supposed to be the main event player? Because he seemed to be getting a bit more of the spotlight back then than he did when he was during the CM Punk Summer of Punk storyline.
No, I don't think so, Dan. I don't think they treated him as well as they should have in 2011. But in 2009, he's still a little bit of in my mind anyway, he was still the heel champion who'd still eke out a win and squeak by and stuff like that. I mean, in case we forget, at the end of the match, The Undertaker lays him out, and that's how SummerSlam ends. It's with The Undertaker burying CM Punk under a mountain of rubble. So I'm not sure. So I think that tells you, they wanted to move on to other things.
Yeah.
He was basically the transitional champion from Jeff Hardy to The Undertaker.
Yeah, I guess that is one way of looking at it, and I guess hearing you say that now, that kind of makes quite a lot of sense. But I think at the time, obviously being someone who was initially quite impressed with CM Punk's work, it was quite nice for him to be given that entering into a feud with The Undertaker is no bad thing for anybody. And yes, you could argue that feud basically just buried his title run and kind of killed it dead straight away. But at least at the time, knowing that you were kind of main eventing one of the big four shows and then moving on to feuding with The Undertaker was not something to be sneezed at, I guess. If you were to, and I know again you didn't sort of watch this sort of live, I guess, but the CM Punk Straight Edge Society story angle that this kind of led into, if you had to choose either that or the 2011 Summer of Punk CM Punk, which one would you go for?
I think ultimately I'd still have to go with the 2011 storyline, because even though if it didn't have as much, even though if it did sort of dwindle, I would say that initial promo certainly did bring a flood of excitement to WWE that it hadn't had for a while, and it really sort of gave them a head of steam in a period of time that usually is dead, right? So I think just for that reason I'd have to go with the 2011.
Yeah, I can kind of see why. Although, just thinking back to the Straight Edge Society CM Punk, it just was executed, I think, so well, and I think it was treated as a probably the signature or one of the signature sort of story angles on SmackDown at the time. And I think it was given the kind of respect that it deserved, and I think it was kind of seen through as a feud or as a story angle to its completion. Whereas the Summer of Punk thing, yes, there was this initial excitement around the promo and everything, and then winning the title. But I just can't, with the benefit of hindsight now, I can't look at that angle anymore without just feeling very kind of frustrated, I guess. So yeah, there's just something about CM Punk here in sort of 2009, 2010 that I just think was done so well. And I think this match is a brilliant way to kind of highlight that on the biggest stage possible.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But then I also think that maybe some of I think they were partly allowed to go on last because this was Jeff Hardy's last pay-per-view with the company at the time. I don't think we can rule that out, and obviously there's a stipulation to go with it as well. And nobody was going to follow this match on the card.
Yeah. No, that's true as well. Yeah, but it's just one of those things that any other given night you could see Vince choosing John Cena and Randy Orton over this. It just, for some reason, somebody must have said the right thing to him, or maybe his kind of cooler head prevailed at the time and just decided to go out with this one, which is something we have to be very grateful for. Do you think this match would have had as much of an impact if it wasn't last though?
I think so, Dan. I think so, because at least for me, it's something that I went back and watched, so it wouldn't have made much of a difference to me. Being live in person, I'm not sure, because if you look at The Rock and Hulk Hogan, they were the co-main event on the night. I mean, as in they went on before Chris Jericho and Triple H, and that is the match that we all remember from WrestleMania 18.
Yeah.
So if they had gone on before, I mean, I think if they had gone on before Randy Orton and Cena, I think that match would have just ended up being an afterthought.
Yeah. I guess you could say the same thing about.
And I think Randy Orton versus John Cena didn't exactly have a clean finish anyway, so it wouldn't have made sense to put that show on before Punk and Hardy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that kind of proves your point, I guess, because I'm struggling to remember what actually happened in the Cena and Randy Orton match, to be honest. I kind of went back and watched this, for the purpose of this episode, but I don't think I've watched the Cena Orton match since 2009 when it actually happened, and it's obviously not living in the sort of the memory banks very, very much. Similar sort of thing with the main event of WrestleMania 25. I mean, who actually remembers what happened between Randy Orton and Triple H? Everybody remembers Shawn Michaels and the Undertaker.
The Undertaker, yeah.
So I think this is. I definitely wanted to include this match anyway because knowing the two of us, I knew that there wouldn't be that many kind of relatively recent matches on this list. And for me, 2009, if I'm being honest with myself, talking about anything positive about wrestling, 2009 is quite a late-ish date for me because not that many great things have happened after that date. But I think definitely worth mentioning, and just one that I wanted to kind of kick off with because I think it is just such a great match that does stand the test of time.
Didn't Kenny Omega wrestle the broomstick after 2011? 2009, I beg your pardon.
I have no idea. Again, we're being positive today, though, so it's really fun. Oh, dear. So, was there a match that you wanted to talk about next?
I think, Dan, we were going to look at Hulk Hogan versus Shawn Michaels, and even though the match in itself isn't what you'd isn't a 5-star classic by any stretch of the imagination, it has a pretty interesting backstory and is made comical once you know the backstory, I'd say. Because Shawn Michaels and Hulk Hogan were apparently meant to do a trilogy, with Shawn Michaels winning 2 out of the 3 matches. Oh shit, sorry. So sorry, did somebody call me?
It's okay.
I was saying Shawn Michaels and Hulk Hogan were meant to have a trilogy, but I believe Hulk Hogan had some sort of injury, and which meant that he could only do the one match at SummerSlam, and that was going to be it. So Shawn Michaels obviously wasn't very happy with this arrangement, and he decided to turn himself into a literal pinball. He oversold all of Hulk Hogan's offense and made him look like a complete and utter joke. I mean, you could clearly tell the psychology of it was that Hulk Hogan wanted Shawn Michaels to be a sort of pseudo heel, and he wanted Michaels to beat him up and beat him bloody, and then he would do his usual Hulkamania comeback. But obviously, Michaels is too big a star and too big of an icon to just play the role of another bad guy that Hulk Hogan would dispatch. And he wasn't. And the Shawn Michaels that found God was nowhere to be seen.
Well, yeah, I mean, I actually look. Yeah, it wasn't a 5-star classic like you say, but it's a match that I definitely look back on very fondly. I think the first thing to say, I think Shawn Michaels' heel run at this time was just phenomenal. Like one of my favourite promos of all time was HBK in Montreal. In the build up to this match, he teases that Bret Hart's going to come out, and it's just a big sort of a big tease at the end. I think it's just so well, and I've always preferred HBK as a heel anyway. I think his mic work is better. I think he's more believable as that kind of just that little sort of dastardly little heel that you just want to smack the face of. It's always something slightly uneasy about seeing this kind of baby face Shawn Michaels, unless you're talking about the very end of his career when he's basically just like a legend who's sort of coming back now and then. But when he's in a full-time capacity, I prefer him as a heel anyway. So maybe this is why I like this match so much, because it's A little bit like the old sort of 1997 HBK coming back almost.
Yeah, you're right. He did bring back the 97 HBK, the HBK that was battling a few demons in his life at that point. That was the version of Shawn Michaels that he did bring back. And it did make for some it did make for some interesting television. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. And I think the match itself, I think, is it's a very typical Hogan match, like you said. It's something that wouldn't be out of place in sort of 1987. Obviously Shawn Michaels having the sort of the majority of the offense during the match. Hulk Hogan ended up sort of getting the collar, and then that big sort of hulking up at the end. It sort of speaks to that I guess kind of nostalgia feeling that a lot of fans of a certain age have about Hulk Hogan's run in the 80s and kind of seeing it play out again in 2005. It's just something about it I'm sort of very fond of, I guess. And then sort of knowing what we know about what was going on kind of in real life around it, and Shawn Michaels' his temper tantrums and turning himself into a pinball, like you say, is just so entertaining. But I think it's really impressive, though, that he was doing this to, I guess, kind of show up Hulk Hogan or to kind of embarrass him to a certain extent. But it didn't take away from the match completely, like people remember those moments in the match, but altogether it's still a worthy SummerSlam main event, would you say?
Yeah, it certainly is a worthy SummerSlam main event. I don't think there are any two ways about that. Just because these are two massive icons who've never had a match after coming into their own. So it certainly is a worthy SummerSlam main event, and I'm sure it did a huge number at the box office too. But that being said, I don't think anybody can complain about this match either, because while Shawn Michaels did go to his way to make Hogan look silly, it was a decent match in its own right, and the crowd was certainly you're invested in it. This was what they came for. I mean, they got up for this match more than they did anything else on the card, I'd argue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Do you think like Shawn Michaels' performance in this match, do you think if somebody did that today in AEW, they'd be kind of hailed as an artistic genius?
Kenny Omega, I think that's how you sell. that's how Kenny Omega sells every match.
Maybe that's it. Maybe we've cracked the secret. Maybe this is the first match that Omega saw and thought, oh, that's it. Okay, I'm gonna base my whole career on Shawn Michaels' performance here, not knowing that it was actually meant to be a piss take. Yeah. So yeah, I think for me at least, this match fits into that kind of like favourite match, but not necessarily kind of the best match of all time. It's not something you would objectively point to and say this is an example of great wrestling, but it's just I suppose maybe it's an example of good sports entertainment rather than good wrestling, if that's fair to say.
Yeah, because it has that meta aspect to it and everything.
Yeah. And it's Hulk Hogan as well. I know, say what you will about him, and I wanted to include this match myself as well, because I think it would be a shame to talk about SummerSlam history without mentioning Hogan. Say what you will about his personal life and how things have kind of fallen apart in that sense, but he's still that beloved character that we all sort of recognise from the 80s.
Absolutely. I mean, he's one of the he's one of the icons of the professional wrestling business, and maybe its biggest star ever.
It's actually interesting. I mean, I think we briefly sort of discussed this before. The fact that to get a Hogan match in this list, I think this is, if I'm not mistaken, I think this is the only match we're going to be talking about with Hogan in it, and that's quite surprising, because I think if this was like a WrestleMania or a SummerSlam Survivor Series sort of special edition, then I think I'd personally be bringing up quite a lot of Hogan matches from the 80s. But just something about SummerSlam that there just wasn't that kind of signature big kind of late 80s, early 90s match involving Hogan or some of the sort of bigger names from that era. I think that's quite an interesting interesting reflection there.
Yeah, and SummerSlam as an event certainly did come into its own in the late '90s, and even to this day. I mean, and more recently, I'd say to this day. I mean, there are times when SummerSlam ends up being a much better show than WrestleMania, just because you are usually giving the audience what they want at that point, and it's not a feeble attempt to cater to the mainstream, which never works out anyway.
There just seems to be a bit sort of less pressure on everything when it comes to SummerSlam, because WrestleMania, it really, really matters to most fans, who's going to be in that main event spot. Because basically being in the main event WrestleMania is basically the company saying, right, you are one of our sort of main signature guys. SummerSlam, it is a big four pay-per-view, and it is important, I guess, how it finishes, but there doesn't seem to be that kind of stress and anxiety going into SummerSlam compared to a WrestleMania, if that makes sense.
Yeah, WrestleMania usually tends to be this sort of back and forth between the company and its fans. They want to push X as the babyface champion, and the audience usually rejects them wholeheartedly. You don't really have that at SummerSlam.
Yeah, absolutely. So, next match I wanted to bring up, and this was, I think this would be on a lot of people's sort of top 10 or top 5 SummerSlam matches of all time. So HBK versus Triple H, 2002. So I think when we were kind of piecing this episode together, I think we both mentioned this as one we wanted to talk about. So Shawn Michaels' first match back after, what was it, 4 years of being away.
At WrestleMania 14, yes. This is his first match back from the crippling back injury that left him on the sidelines. At this point, none of us are expecting to see him wrestle again, and it's a surprise to everybody when he announces that he's working Triple H at SummerSlam. And even when he's working Triple H at SummerSlam, the expectation is that this is just a one-off. And Shawn Michaels takes to the ring like a Dr. Water, as always, and he performs at such a high level, that you just, that he feels he can go again, and this became probably the best run of his career. I'd argue this run of his career was better than better than his early years.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I don't think there's any question about that, to be honest. I think obviously from a character perspective, maybe you could say his run in 1997 was in some ways the catalyst that maybe brought about the Attitude Era, if you want to kind of say that.
Yeah, that run with DX certainly was a catalyst for the Attitude Era. I'd argue that. I'd agree with that, rather.
But yeah, from an in-ring point of view, obviously Shawn Michaels' run post 2002, I think, was absolutely sort of unparalleled, personally. And yeah, like you say, coming back as to what I think most people imagine would be, again, like, like a one-off sort of special attraction thing. And it's just saying, his performance here, it could easily have been like the day after his 1998 match with Stone Cold. It's like he didn't miss a step by the looks of it. He was in great sort of physical condition. I think clearly as well in a much sort of healthier mental state, and just sort of ready to kind of take on the that responsibility of kind of holding that spotlight in such a big sort of stage like SummerSlam. And just an absolute pleasure to watch this match back again. Perfect kind of storytelling within the match as well as kind of outside it. Triple H being the perfect heel to sort of try and sort of derail this sort of great comeback storyline of HBK's. Just tremendous. So kind of wrestling 101, if you want to say that. Just how to make a good wrestling match. Put the two right guys in there. Follow a very simple formula of heel dominates most of the match, and then face makes a triumphant comeback. Everything about this is perfect. So I don't know whether this got 5 stars, but if it didn't, then it definitely deserves it.
Yeah, agreed. And the storytelling here is just about perfect. It really features Shawn Michaels like digging deep and finding things that he never thought he'd be able to do again, and then Triple H just cutting him off at the right time using his ring craft and the fact that he's just he's just the more active. He's just the more active wrestler at this point. The This match sort of goes to tell you that you don't really need to go all hardcore deathmatch and everything in pro wrestling to make people care, as long as you establish elements for the audience to care about. They're going to, it's Chekhov's gun, right? It's basically the most basic principle in all of storytelling. In this match, the audience is conditioned to care about Shawn Michaels' back, and when Triple H does a backbreaker, they react as though he's shot him with a bloody rifle. So that's the sort of psychology at work here, and is something we will never see in All Elite Gymnastics. This is the sort of thing that pro wrestling is lost, and it's why it isn't as good anymore, because nobody puts in any attention to detail. The finish is perfect as well, because it demonstrates Shawn Michaels' rustiness, so he can't overcome Triple H with a super kick. He sort of has to eke out the win by the skin of his teeth.
Yeah. Well, just to that point, I mean, the fact that people rave about the Kenny Olivier versus John Moxley match that they had, where they had to use barbed wire and concrete floors and tables and everything just to kind of get that point across that this is, a quote-unquote extreme match. Like, all you need is just very subtle, very kind of believable storytelling. That's all that you need. You don't need to go the full way, like you said. Just the fact that this was built up for so many years. Everybody's concerned about HBK's back, and I think JR played a brilliant role in this match as well. He really sort of reacting to Triple H's kind of destruction of Shawn Michaels. I think that just added so much to it. He kept saying, it's Triple H's mission to kind of put Shawn Michaels in a wheelchair, and you kind of, I know it's kayfabe, and I know it's wrestling, but you part of you can kind of buy into that, which is where the emotional investment comes from, as opposed to just two guys, like two spot monkeys, kind of hurling whatever at each other, for no particular reason, or got no sort of long-term consequence.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. This JR at his best just added so much to every storyline and match that he commentated on. He is, in my opinion, the greatest pro wrestling announcer there's ever been. And like you said, and this match, I mean, if you watch the end of this match, I mean, you're certainly worried that Shawn Michaels is never going to walk again, and you're definitely not expecting him to make a comeback at Survivor Series in an Elimination Chamber match and win the world title.
Absolutely. And I think what we have to say here is, it's credit to Triple H as a professional performer, I think, because what you want is to put Shawn in that position where people can believe that he's in real danger, but also give him to someone who is a proper ring general, who knows what they're doing, is able to kind of do these things safely whilst looking like it's believable. And that man is Triple H at the end of the day. A lot of people may think of him as like this sort of overrated guy who's basically just been feeding his own ego over the years. But in these sort of situations, Triple H is exactly the kind of person that you want.
Yeah, because he has the wherewithal to pull off the match, and he has an understanding of psychology and everything. Triple H certainly, by this point, he wasn't the athlete that he was in 2000 before the quad injury, when he could just bump for everybody and make everything look fantastic. But the mental aspect of it still made him a tremendous performer.
Would you say this is the best match that either of the two men ever had?
I think it's a harder one to call for Shawn, just because he had so many fantastic matches throughout his career. And the same can be said for Triple H too, because Triple H did also, because I'm personally partial towards the two matches he had with Mick Foley at Royal Rumble and No Way Out, I believe. The street fight and the Hell in a Cell match. So those are the two I'm partial to. And as for Shawn Michaels, I think it's hard to look beyond the Undertaker match, but other than that, this might be it for me.
Yeah, I think. I think Shawn, there's just so many matches that I think maybe there's maybe one or two that you could put above this one. I think a strong case could be made for this being one of, if not the best Triple H match of all time. but you know, partly, and they were, you know, they were, I suppose the WWE were going to give them a lot here because there was this ready-made storyline, the fact that these two were in a tag team, you know, years before, and that they've sort of maintained this friendship that everybody's aware of. So all the ingredients were kind of there, and I think they executed it so well. So yeah, I definitely would make a case for this one being one of, you know, Triple H's best matches. And I think maybe it's safe to say this is probably the best match that they ever had against each other. Would you say?
The best match they had against each other, without a shadow of a doubt. They did have the three stages of Hell match at the Armageddon, which I didn't think was very good. The Elimination Chamber match was also very compelling, but I think this one was just better because of the storytelling and the back and everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I say, just I think a match that's on anybody's top 10 or top 5 SummerSlam matches of all time. I think it has to be.
Oh, 100%. This might be my number one SummerSlam match of all time, but that's another question for now.
Yeah, I think once we've maybe talked about these, I think it might be fun to try and come up with a top 3 if we can kind of decide or agree on them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this will be making a very strong case for the number 1 spot personally. But yeah. Okay. So did you want to introduce the next match we're talking about?
So the next match we're going to look at was The Undertaker versus Bret Hart, and this I believe is at the peak of Bret Hart's run as a heel in WWF in 1997. The Hart Foundation were tremendous. They were obviously baby faces in Canada and heels in America, and I thought, and even though this sort of dynamic wasn't as popular as the stuff that came about in the Attitude Era, this was still really good television, and I'd argue was just as good, or if not better, than anything that WCW was doing at the time. And The Undertaker was the babyface champion. The stipulation for this match was that if Bret Hart lost, he'd never wrestle in America again. And the special guest referee here is Shawn Michaels.
Yeah. There's just so many sort of great ingredients here.
Personally,
I'm... Oh, sorry, go
on. No, I mean, the thing is, you're sort of expecting Shawn Michaels to screw Bret Hart here the entire time, and that just never happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's genius kind of booking, I guess, in that sense. You know, it's creating those possibilities and those sort of dynamics. I think that's something that Vince used to do incredibly well, kind of back in these days. You know, sort of give fans that level of uncertainty, and that kind of adds to the excitement of what's going to happen here. But yeah, personally, I mean, for me, maybe this is me kind of being a bit older and maybe looking back over the years now. But 1997 is such an important year for the WWF and just, you know, as a consequence for wrestling overall. I'd maybe even say, I think maybe at the time, kind of being in the thick of it all, I maybe enjoyed, 1999, 2000, 2001 a bit better. But, looking back on it now, 1997 was when those pieces were starting to be put into place. And it's when I think wrestling just became a bit more kind of sophisticated and a bit more kind of longer term booking was kind of coming into the fore here. And like you say, I think this is one of Bret Hart's best runs for me as in any era. I think his kind of anti-American kind of heel run with the Hart Foundation, I think was tremendous. Again, similar to the Punk and Hardy thing, we knew the real life animosity between Bret and Shawn, which would kind of play into this as well. And yeah, just add in the Undertaker. I mean, what more can you need really for a match to work?
Yeah, and this is sort of the start of the heel run, which leads to Shawn Michaels forming DX with Triple H in China, and this would of course lead to his Hell in a Cell match with the Undertaker, which is the first Hell in a Cell match, and in my opinion probably the best one that they've ever done. And it's in the casket match with the Undertaker, the Royal Rumble, where Shawn Michaels would break his back and then go on hiatus.
Yeah. Again, it shows how big a year 1997 was, because at this time they were introducing the idea of Undertaker's brother, Obviously, we hadn't seen him yet, so that would obviously come later. But it was already been talked about. I think Paul Bearer made a very sort of small appearance during this match to kind of like tease that something was going on with Undertaker as well long term. Of course, this was the championship reign that began and would end with the Montreal Screwjob later on at Survivor Series. So just so many things going on, and like you say, that led to the Hell in a Cell match between Shawn and Taker. So just so many pieces kind of happening at the same time. Really, really well sort of written sort of wrestling, in 1997. I mean, as for the match itself, I mean, it's no grand spectacle. It's it's not something you would necessarily remember from kind of bell to bell. I guess good kind of in-ring heel work from Bret Hart, constantly going after Taker's leg, trying to lead up to the sharpshooter. And I believe, was this the first time on screen that the sharpshooter was broken by an opponent?
I mean, that's what Jim Ross was claiming, but I doubt that's the case. I mean, someone must have broken out the sharpshooter at some point of time.
I think it was, I don't know whether it was a different, maybe people had broken it by getting to the ropes or something, but Undertaker basically just broke out of it using his own strength. I think that was the story they were trying to tell, was that had never happened before. I mean, again, it might, it's probably just fabrication, I guess, on the commentator's part, but it still felt like a very big deal to watch it and to experience it, yeah.
I personally thought Bret Hart's work in this match was tremendous. He brought out all the cheap tricks, he worked the body part, he set up the submission hold really well. And this is certainly why Bret Hart was a pro wrestling genius.
Absolutely, yeah. It's if you didn't know anything about wrestling and you kind of looked at this match from an outside point of view, you would expect like the bigger, taller Undertaker to maybe kind of dominate more. But the fact that, knowing what we know about wrestling and how well Bret Hart can perform, whether he's a heel or a face, it just seems kind of so right for Bret to kind of be on top for the most of this. It gets that babyface sort of sympathy on Taker, and it tells that kind of story, I guess. And Taker eventually does make some kind of a comeback. But then we get that very kind of screwy finish to the match involving Shawn and the chair and everything like that. So, I think booked really well. Not one of the best sort of wrestling spectacles you'll ever see, but a very well worked kind of story being told with these three guys.
It's tremendous, and as you said, there's just so many pieces interwoven here and there that sort of spun off into bigger storylines down the road. Dan, I also must say I certainly did enjoy Vince McMahon on commentary here. I thought he played off Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler very well.
I've always thought of myself as maybe in a bit of a minority, but I always enjoyed Vince McMahon's commentary work. It was so over the top at times. I don't know, but yeah, there's something about it that worked for me, especially when he was in the middle of JR and Jerry.
Yeah, fair. That's fair. So, is there anything else we wanted to touch on in this match?
Well, not necessarily this match. I mean, I was kind of going back and forth, actually, maybe including another match from this show. So I think it might have been the match before, or a couple of matches before, we saw the Intercontinental Championship match between Stone Cold and Owen Hart. Another example of how important 1997 was as a year for wrestling, because this is the match, I don't know if you remember, where
Austin breaks his neck.
Yeah, so the pile driver sort of spot kind of goes slightly wrong, and there's this kind of I just imagine the worry and the stress of people backstage thinking, like, how serious is this neck injury going to be? Like, how much is this going to derail our plans going forward? Because I think at this point they already knew that Stone Cold was going to feature, in the main event of WrestleMania, or something to that level. So that kind of adds to this main event match, actually, kind of knowing what happened before and knowing the kind of thoughts that maybe were going through Vince's mind, and how big an effect this was going to have on the company. And maybe looking at Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and thinking, if the worst did happen to Stone Cold, can I rely on these two to sort of carry me forward and kind of take on WCW? There's just loads of interesting things going on here, I think.
Right, and Dan, I'd also say that if Stone Cold Steve Austin hadn't gotten injured here, what sort of do you think that there's a chance that WWE would have messed up his booking in the on the path to WrestleMania that year, and they would have messed up his grand coronation?
I think it's definitely possible. I'd like to think that 1997 Vince McMahon, knowing that there's this, this well, I was going to say threat, but it was more than a threat. It was actually like the bigger company doing the more sort of successful kind of ticket sales and ratings sort of over the border. So I would like to think that maybe kind of cooler heads would have prevailed anyway, and Stone Cold would have been booked the way he was. But yeah, I mean the fact that he was literally seen, breaking his neck on screen, like managing to kind of walk away under, most of his own power. I think just added to that kind of badass character that they were trying to tell. It's little things like that that you can't plan for, and they can either completely destroy everything, or they can maybe give you an unexpected gift. And thankfully, the neck injury wasn't so devastating that he was able to continue. Although, yeah, the ending to that match itself was a little bit awkward, but they got through it somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, well, I mean, unfortunately, Owen Hart, of course, passed away a couple of years later. But Steve Austin wasn't happy with this incident, and he held it against Owen Hart for a couple of years then.
Yeah, and I think obviously on the Raw after Over the Edge '99, I think the fact that Stone Cold was able to come out and kind of show that sign of respect to him. I mean, I can't remember what it was. It might have been one of the Jim Cornette videos I was listening to, but apparently Stone Cold, he was very perfectly willing to go out and kind of pay tribute to Owen Hart, but he thought that the thing they asked him to do was, I think he kind of raised a beer can and drank to Owen Hart's memory. I mean, Owen didn't drink, and I think there was some kind of animosity between Stone Cold and the creative team, because he was like, this isn't the best way to honour Owen's memory or something like that. I don't know how much truth there is to that story, but I suppose from an on-screen point of view, at the very least, Stone Cold was able to kind of put those differences with Owen to one side to kind of pay respect to him, considering what had happened.
Yeah, that's true.
So 1997, a very good SummerSlam by all accounts. By the sounds of it, a lot of things happened, and the start of something that was to come, maybe.
So, Dan, we're moving on to one of your favorites, I believe.
Yeah. So I suppose it's no surprise. Although I don't really concentrate on this too much. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about the Bulldog versus Bret Hart, SummerSlam '92. I mean, it was from Wembley Stadium. It did involve the British Bulldog. But even if I wasn't British, I think I would still look at this match as one of the best SummerSlam matches of all time. Personally, I think this was just so well done. I just think the storyline leading up to it, obviously Bulldog and Bret being brother-in-law, the whole Hart family dynamic here. I'm struggling to remember the name of Bret's sister, but obviously her involvement here, and the kind of backstage interview they did with her, where they asked her, what are you thinking? Who would you want to see win here? And basically just said, to be honest, I just don't want either of them to get hurt. And the fact that they kept kind of cutting back to her, and they kept cutting back to Stu and Helen and the rest of the Hart family. And it's just such a great story. And obviously, the right result at the end with Bulldog winning the Intercontinental Championship in front of the Wembley audience. It's just so well. I think it lives on in British families, British wrestling fans' memories. Okay, let me ask you. Obviously, someone who isn't from the UK, is this something that travels well over there as well, or is it just something that British fans kind of maybe think too much of?
Well, I mean, it certainly does travel well. You can see what it means to the Bulldog, and you can see how much it means to the fans in attendance and everything. And it's a storyline that went over very well. Bret Hart, of course, is a master of his craft, and he does everything um, to build anticipation for the whole deal. And once you get to the finish, and once you get to the finish, it just works perfectly. And I think the whole thing was just so well produced. The British Bulldog falling to his knees, um, and Vince McMahon just not saying anything. He just lets the sort of he just sort of lets the scene tell its own story, and I think that's just fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's one of those. Whenever you see these, top 10 greatest fan pops of all time, this one always features on it because it's such a great reaction when Bulldog gets that sunset flip into the victory. I mean, I've seen this match so many times I could probably tell you like move for move what happens on it because it's just it's part of a British wrestling fans kind of rite of passage to kind of to watch this for the first time. I absolutely loved Bobby Heenan's commentary on this as well. I think he said, "Oh, it's really nice for the Bulldog to let Whoopi Goldberg do his hair for him." It's I think him and Vince were just as a commentary duo were very well played each other very well.
Yeah, they were really good. Bobby Heenan's just tremendous, one of the greatest.
Yeah. I also love the fact that they open with the Balmoral bagpiping. It's I mean, British Bulldog isn't Scottish. The match isn't being held in Scotland, but for some reason, they thought, oh, we'll start with a load of bagpipers playing Scotland the Brave because that's close enough to London, I guess.
That's the most British thing they could think of.
I mean, yes, it gave Roddy Piper an excuse to come out and make an appearance, but it wasn't exactly needed here. But yeah, I think really interesting match. I think this effectively was babyface versus babyface, but I guess Bret had to kind of play it as a kind of de facto heel almost. Obviously, the way he kind of approached the match from a technical wrestling standpoint, he was in the kind of heel position. He was, Bulldog had to kind of fight from the bottom to get that sort of fan sympathy and the fans on his side. I think given the family element, I think this was the right way to go. But it would have been interesting to maybe see Bulldog face somebody like a HBK, for example, who's more of a natural heel. But yeah, I wouldn't have this match any other way. I think it just worked perfectly well between the two of them.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dan. That the familial aspect of it also certainly would have worked in this match. I'd have thought, and as you said, like Bret Hart played the role of the champion. I mean, it's sort of the pseudo heel, the same way Tanahashi or John Cena would have fared when they were wrestling other baby faces as champion.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, then I can certainly see why this match is so fondly remembered by the British wrestling community. Because everything just works so perfectly here, the audience in attendance, and it certainly is a historic occasion for the WWE. Yeah,
and I think the Intercontinental Championship being in the main event of a Big Four pay-per-view, I think is obviously very significant here. And yes, you could argue that it was the guy holding the guy challenging for it and the occasion itself. But we can't ignore the fact that the Intercontinental Championship was taken seriously back then as a legitimate title to go for. I can't imagine the IC title main eventing any pay-per-view in this day and age. But maybe I'm wrong.
Oh no, absolutely! You couldn't imagine the IC title main eventing anything in this day and age. Well, I mean, unless Brock Lesnar held it, then they'd probably main event a pay-per-view with it. But absolutely, Danny, it just shows you how awesome having a secondary title that people take seriously can be. And unfortunately, right now, people will never take a secondary title seriously unless you have like a major star holding it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean that's an interesting point as well because. Again, this may be me kind of viewing things through that kind of British wrestling fan perspective, but the Bulldog at this time, I mean, he didn't exactly go on to have a long IC title reign. He never got anywhere close to the World Championship picture. would you say that maybe that was him not being fully utilised? Do you think he had kind of world championship material in him, or?
At that time, no, I don't think so, Dan. I didn't think the Bulldog was world championship material. I always thought he was more of an upper mid carder. He was a character that certainly fit that era very well, but I don't think he had the sort of charisma you'd expect from a main eventer. He certainly didn't feel like a Hulk Hogan or a Shawn Michaels or anybody like that.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. Although 1992, it's when a lot of these sort of big names are kind of moving away from the business. You wouldn't have Hogan for much longer. You didn't have Warrior or Savage or anything like that. So it was a time when newer guys were kind of being introduced into the fold, and obviously the idea of Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels being that kind of main event scene. But yeah, I guess I agree. Thinking about it objectively, I just think there was something about the Bulldog where he was. This was probably as high as he was going to get, really. This kind of secondary title level. But again, the fact that the IC title meant so much more back then than it does today. It's no bad thing to say that the highlight of your career is winning the IC title in the main event of SummerSlam. Not many people can say that.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely, it's one of the. It's a great moment in the history of.
Is this? Would you rank this as kind of anywhere? In terms of all time IC title matches at any wrestling show, would you rank this as amongst the top maybe?
I think so, just because of the fact that it headlined the pay-per-view and everything. I mean, obviously the all-time standard is going to be Macho Man versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat at WrestleMania 3. I don't think anything will ever surpass that. But this match is certainly up there with any of the other IC title matches I can think of. The other contender would be Triple H versus The Rock at SummerSlam 98.
Yeah, which
we might discuss in another episode of the show.
Yep, I think that's definitely possible. But yeah, no, I think that's a great way to kind of close out this sort of part one of this series of SummerSlam matches. I really enjoyed talking about these matches, actually. I mean, it's again, we challenged ourselves to be a little bit more positive last week compared to some of the other episodes we've put out there. And I think it's really kind of made me excited maybe for SummerSlam that's just around the corner. It's just a good place to leave things, and then maybe next time we'll talk about maybe some other SummerSlam matches that we want to discuss, and then see if we can come up with some kind of a top 3 maybe. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good, man.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hope everybody enjoyed that, and like I say, keep an eye on the channel for part 2 of this video series. Apologies that it's gone on a little bit longer than our normal episodes, but at least we can't say that we haven't been positive today, so hope you all enjoyed that and appreciate that. And again, I say it every week obviously in here, but I hope you are doing well, and I hope you have a good week, and I'll speak to you next time.
Yeah, looking forward to doing more of these.
Okay, take care everybody, and we'll see you all soon.